70 pounds of peaches 2 years after grafting. So I grafted it in 2018. It grew about this high. 2019, it was up to my chin, and 2020, it produced 70 pounds of peaches. Now, that is a little bit of an aberration, but it shows possibility. So how did I get there? Well, the story starts back when I lived in a suburban house in Bloomington, Minnesota. I wanted to grow one of every kind of fruit tree in my backyard. And so I had plums, and I had a pear tree, and I had an apple tree. And I was just up late one night looking for an apricot tree that would grow, and 2 in the morning. And, you plant nerds get weird, right? 2 in the morning, I found this guy, a newsletter, a man by the name of Bob Purvis had written a newsletter about why apricots grow in some parts of the country and not in other parts of the country. And so his email address was there from 2006, and this was in 2009. I sent Bob a letter saying what apricots grow in Minnesota. Bob happened to be the apricot interest group chair of a group called NAFEX. And he said, I used to live in Minnesota. He now lived in Idaho, and he's growing fruit in a semi-arid area, Zone 7. And he, actually not too far from where I lived, he was growing apricots and cherries and a few peaches. And Bob mentioned that he did a grafting class in Minnesota once a year. And so I took it with my daughter in 2010. Bob and I became good friends. And so I hosted him every year that he came. And at one point I said, Bob, how come peaches don't grow here? I know it's cold, but why else? And among other things, we talked about the effect of light in the winter on peaches. And that if you're familiar with something called sun scald or southwest injury, it's when the sun in the winter is very low, like it's a very steep angle. It reflects off the snow and hits the tree at the same time. And on the southwest side of the tree, it can warm up there, warmer than, like you've seen snow melt around a tree. Well, in the case of an apricot or a peach tree, that can kill the tree by separating the bark with the freeze and thaw effect. It can separate the bark, and then bacteria gets back there, and eventually a tree will die, or some kind of fungus. And so people have tried spraying white paint on the tree. Apricots and peaches are exceptionally vulnerable to this. Apples and pears get by with it. And so I said, well, has anybody ever tried to cover the trees? And Bob said, well, people have tried to plant them in the shade so that they're in the shade in the winter, but in the sun. I describe it to people as if I got pregnant with something. I could not stop thinking about this. I felt like it was a riddle somebody gave me, and I had to figure it out. And so I cannot find this picture. I have one picture of the system I set up on the south side of my garage in Bloomington. And I decided to make a cover for the tree, a rigid cover, but I had to make the tree shape the cover. So what I did was I trellised the tree on the side of the garage, so it's 10 feet long, 7 feet high, and only 2 feet deep. And then I made a plywood box that fit over that, and that fit against my garage. And at that time, I didn't know how cold it would get in there. So I put heat tape in there on the ground, just 6 feet of heat tape in that small square space. Well, so on the cold days, I would go plug the heat tape in and see how much the temperature changed in there. And otherwise, I just left it like that. I painted it white, by the way. The whole box was white. And for 3 years, I had the best tasting nectarines I had ever tasted. I deliberately picked a variety called Flavor Top that it said in the catalog was subject to cold. And I thought, if I can grow that here, I can do anything. And so among the other things I did on that tree was we had cut down a tree in our backyard, like a big pine tree, and to get rid of the chips, the wood chips, I thought, I don't want to have to mow in this area, so I was going to put wood chips down, but I had way too many wood chips, so I tilled them into the soil when I amended the soil with fertilizer. I didn't know until later, that would really help the microbial activity in the soil, the fungal activity from dead and decaying trees is better for fruit than compost. Not that compost is bad, but that's what I did. So, and then also I sprayed foliar sprays on the tree at incremental times during the summer. There was a company in Minneapolis called Agro-K. They're still there. They used to do a seminar every year to talk about foliar sprays and how you could take samples, leaf samples from the tree and determine what was in the tree at any given time and then spray that on the tree. And so together with a soil sample and the leaf samples, I can determine what to spray. Well, not knowing if it would work on a large scale, we jumped off the deep end and bought 35 acres and put up one high tunnel through a grant from the county and planted these trees in there. The first 3 years I had cherry trees in there. I wanted to grow cherries. And the problem was I didn't have the right rootstock. And so the trees, if I didn't prune them, they would grow 8 feet in 1 year. So, but I had 3 peach trees in there just to see how they would work. And those 3 peach trees produced 50 pounds of peaches in the 3rd year. So I said, I'm growing peaches. So I cut all the cherry trees down and then I grafted apricot trees and peach trees and planted. So in this tunnel, I had half the trees, 18 trees were peaches and 18 trees were apricots. This year marks the 10th year in a row I've had peaches on the property. And they have survived a temperature of 36 below zero. That's the outside temperature. The coldest inside temperature of the tunnel has only been 13 below. And so what I'm concerned more about is the bud hardiness of each individual cultivar, because the trees can survive to about 25 below zero. But with other factors, you may not get a fruit crop. So, I started doing research. At first, I only had like 5 varieties in tunnel number 1. And as I moved, I got a second tunnel, I planted more, I got a grant, a SAR grant, I got the EQUIP grants, and the Minnesota Sustainable Grant. And moved them, made more. So I'm just going to show you what I did in the soil when I started planting the trees. That was similar to what I did on the side of my garage. So first of all, to tell you about the spacing is approximately 8 feet apart in 8-foot rows. The height tunnels are 36 or 34 feet wide, and depending on the tunnel is either 72, 54, or 78 feet long. And after 3 tunnels, I have about 100 trees. I have about 60 varieties of peaches and probably about 10 varieties of apricots. And so what you're seeing in the slide here is when I plant the trees, this is another thing Agro-K told us about growing. These are all grafted trees, by the way. I grafted them earlier in the year. So I plant them right in the tunnel after grafting them, rather than putting them out in a nursery for like a year or 2. I knew they wouldn't survive outside if I had them outside. So I plant them directly in there. And so inside the tunnel, each tunnel, I amended the soil with about 3 or 4 inches of hardwood chips, and in that tunnel, probably 6 pickup trucks full of horse manure. So I do things, I follow organic practices, but I'm not certified. But I till that in, and then around each tree when I plant it, you can see there's kind of a moat, about 3 feet across. And the day I plant them, I mix up liquid fertilizer for a root drench. And so the root drench is based on soil sample, depending on what's there and what's missing in the soil. In that area, I was short on magnesium and boron. And so with the soil sample I got from the test, they give me increments of how many cups or ounces or quarts per 100 gallons I can make the root drench out of. And I knew that peach trees require more nitrogen. And so I put about 25% more nitrogen in my root drench than I did by the recommendation. And so I do that when I plant the tree, and then I do it in mid-July again. And that's the only time I do a root drench on them, is to push growth. And so something about peach trees is this, as for the first several years, first 2 years, I just want to grow scaffold branches and make the tree bring its form up. So grafting, well, you'll see later in the pictures that grafting is better than buying a finished tree because, although not a bad thing to buy from a good nursery, but they have a trunk on them. So they have 3 feet of trunk and then the branches are feathered branches up here. Well, I want them to grow more like a bush. So grafting allows me to do like an upsilon, a branch sticking north and south. So you can see I have drip irrigation. A lot of stuff that I do is by donated things. I really take a lot of money out of my own pocket. Not every grant has covered everything I want to do. I'm a very curious person. I have to experiment all the time and people are happy to help. So like Becca said, I would have rather had 2 strings of irrigation, but only had enough material given to me for 1. It's worked in this tunnel though. So what I do to suppress weeds is put this white plastic down. The first tunnel, I had 6 inches of wood chips because I wanted that to feed the microbes. I wanted worms and beetles to crawl up in there and eat the wood chips and bring the nutrients down there. But the weeds loved that. And I'm not kidding you, things got so carried away. I was mowing inside my high tunnel. But what the white plastic does, really nice, it's multi-purpose. The white plastic first is to keep the moisture in the soil. It also suppresses weeds. It also reflects the light because we're losing about 15% of the light through the plastic, the greenhouse plastic. And my theory was proven this way. The first tunnel I did that, it took me an afternoon to put the plastic down. I got tan on the bottom of my chin. So I know it's working. So it's putting the light back up on the tree. And another thing that it does is it provides a sterile platform. So in the fall, when I sweep up all the leaves, I spray organic peroxide on there to reduce fungal issues. And then the other thing it does, even though you can see, well, you can't see it, maybe on the end, another slide will show, I put exclusion netting to keep especially the plum curculio out. But if a bug should get in there and get in the fruit, when it drops to the plastic, it can't pupate. So there's multi-layers of good about it. I didn't want to use plastic. And some of my friends have talked about putting white cardboard down, those organic friends of mine, which could be done, but that deteriorates through the summer. So the good news is, this is silage tarp, by the way. The technical term is black-white plastic. Black on the bottom and white on top. And so that's number 1. Number 2 is you can see the lanes. Now, those trees, the first year, grew 44 inches on average. So I'm pushing growth. The high tunnel trees grow fast. And so that's good things for the first 2 years. But when they get big, I have to keep a lane open for the sunlight. And so in the case of a peach, this year's growth is next year's fruit. So when I'm training the trees, I don't want anything in the lanes. So I know I'm just going to take my hedge clipper and go straight down there. But yet, in the center of the tree, the most, see what I've got on the next slide, if I've got it there, I'll go back here. The center of the tree, I'm basically trying to do open vase style, which means the tree is looking like a bush, but at the base of the tree, and then the branches come out and I try to have about 5 scaffold branches. And then, because the trees are growing exponentially, I summer prune at least twice in the summer, and often the third time is very little, but I still do it. I'm also watching for bud development. Sometimes between August and October, you'll see the buds start developing before they reach terminal bud, which is like the tree just stops growing and kind of winterizes itself. So I thought initially, now things have changed as I've gone on. I've done 3 tunnels, and the first, second, and third tunnel were a couple of years apart. And now that I knew a little bit more about fertilizing, by the way, the root drench I put on there, what I forgot to mention is I use a supportive microbial element in there, that agro-K cell is called Biomax. It works with the microbes in the soil. And along with that, the other nutrients I put in there, I put about 2 gallons of molasses per 100 gallons in with that. And that sugar helped the microbes to survive and be active the first summer. And so thus the trees grow. Now, what's happening is amazing, because in the third year, the third tunnel that I planted in 2023, half the trees were grafted and half were from a nursery. And some of those trees in 2024 produced 50 pounds of fruit in 1 year from planting. So when I said that 70 pounds was kind of a little bit overboard, that I'm asking myself, what is the target of what I want to do? Everything I'm doing is experimental. I don't have 20 acres. I haven't been doing this for 20 years. I'm just saying that what I have done works better than I could have ever imagined. So one thing I did not tell you about, and this is the winter cover that I put on there. How did I get to that? So when we were talking about the absence of light on a tree, that they had to be protected. In the second or third year in my backyard, when I had the protection system, my little box that I covered it with, somebody had given me a Honeycrisp apple tree. And the Honeycrisp apple tree was in a bucket. I didn't know where I was going to plant it in my yard, so I just put it inside my shelter to winter it over to keep it from the rabbits. And I put it in November. This is a typical, I'd be doing this at home right now if I wasn't here, is covering the tunnels. So I put the Honeycrisp apple tree in the bucket in my little shelter in my garage, near my garage. And I take the shelter off in April before the flowers start opening. And when I took the shelter off in April, the Honeycrisp tree, which had its leaves, were fully turgid and fully green in November, had not only not turned brown, they didn't shrivel, they didn't drop. They were all green as the day I put them in there. And it had been 0 degrees that year. I thought, what happened? So what I think happened was the tree did not react to the declining daylight hours. So the senescence was interrupted by darkness. And I thought, should I pull the leaves off? What should I do? I was just kind of shocked. I didn't know. Now the peach tree in the shelter, the leaves did shrivel. But what was interesting is that the sticks, the branches, were bright green like the day I had covered it up. So what that showed me was the power of the absence of light on a tree. And so the greenness meant that it had not been disturbed by the winter light or by the cold or by the snow. So that I had suspended that tree with its full resources. So winter reduces the resources in the tree if it's outside. So what we're doing is kind of suspending them through the winter. And so I put the white plastic, the winter plastic on initially to reduce heat spikes. I had read other data from a woman had done a grant up in North Dakota, and she did not cover it she had done cherry trees, pear trees, and peach trees, and all of them died within 2 years. And one of her days, she had recorded inside her tunnel, it was negative 34 degrees Fahrenheit. That same day, later in the afternoon, it was 45 above. So we got a 70-degree spread just in one day. And I thought, I don't want that to happen. So I put the plastic up there to reduce the heat spikes. And I'm showing you the way I do that. So the way that silage tarp came was in a roll that was kind of like rolled up like an accordion, so that it's rolled up. If you grab the two end corners are together and you pull it apart and the whole thing unravels. So I would throw a bag of tennis balls over and then pull a rope over and then attach my four-wheeler to the other side and pull the whole thing up. I have some planks there so that it wouldn't bind. And then I attach it with wiggle wire on on the end walls, there it is, right there. Wiggle wire there. That's the way that works best. I tried strapping, I tried weights, I tried all of the things. The nice thing about the wiggle wire is that if I put the plastic on and it's about 40 degrees, it shrinks because the winter gets colder and the plastic shrinks. Then it's a nice and smooth surface, almost like shrink wrapped, and the snow slides off it better. I also use Zimmerman high tunnels. And the reason I did that is because they're 2 3/8 inches thick, at least the ones I get, and I wanted something to support a snow load if we had snow. And 3 years ago, we had 95 inches of snow. And so the north end, this is the north end, it's oriented north and south, and this is the south end of the tunnel. And so this piece of plastic on my 72-foot tunnel is 106 feet long by 55 feet wide. And so the south side is because this is where the sun hits it in the winter, and up here and all the way to the end, coming up to here, and then it's about 4 feet over. On this end, I put wood laths on there and fasten them. And I want to keep the door available, so I check it for rabbits or check it for things in the winter. It's nice to get in there. So basically, the trees themselves are in total darkness the whole winter. And so it stays like that from November until April. Let's see what I've got in the next. Yeah, and so another thing about the trees, and I'll just explain why I wait as long as possible, is that the leaves don't drop as early as the leaves outside. The apricot leaves outside drop 3, sometimes 4 weeks before the ones inside. And I'm trying to get the leaves down because on a warm and damp winter, the leaves will mold. And so just more fungal things. And I'm in there shaking in the middle of winter. If we have a 20 below day, usually the leaves will drop. But that didn't happen one year. So I'm in there spraying fungicide at the end of the season just so the leaves don't get moldy and cause problems. Another thing I do before I put the plastic on, before I disconnect my irrigation, I saturate the ground under there. So I mean, leave it on for 12 hours so the ground is like mud almost. And that's so it stays, the moisture stays in there. I got a grant, the sustainable grant that I got through the Minnesota Sustainable. I have a data logger and temperature monitors in each tunnel. And I could tell you this morning on my phone, I could tell you what the temperature was in all 3 tunnels, and the outside temperature this morning was 33 degrees outside in Minnesota and Shafer, where I live. The inside temperature in some of the tunnels was 27 degrees. And so I'll tell you about that. It's a phenomena that nobody knows why it happens, but it could have been the demise of the woman in North Dakota's grant is something I have coined, a phrase I have coined is called the cold compression effect. And I was at the research station in Purdue one year with the group NAFEX, the North America Fruit Explorers, and a guy was taking care of the tomato high tunnels and the raspberry high tunnels. And he said in the fall when the tomatoes are still on the vine, if it gets to be about 35 degrees, they put propane inside there. And I said, why? Heaters, propane heaters. He said, because it'll often get to 28 degrees inside and kill the tomato plants. We don't know why it does it, but it does it. So in my backyard in Bloomington, before I moved to the farm, I built a 30-foot by 15-foot tunnel in my backyard, illegal, by the way, but nobody complained. And I put a remote thermometer in there, monitor from in the house. And one morning in the winter, with no white plastic on, just the greenhouse plastic, the temperature descended from 20 degrees down to 0 degrees in the morning. 0 degrees outside temperature. Inside the tunnel, it was -10. So we're not sure why that happens, but it definitely is a factor. So it happens in the morning at 7 in the morning usually. So the monitors that I have, I can look at data on my desktop computer throughout the night to see when the temperatures were low and why they were low. Was it clear outside? Was it still? I'm not sure if it really I have not yet discovered why. But what I didn't know is the white plastic on some level interrupts that effect. It's not as much as 10 degrees, but it might be 5 or 7 degrees. So still the point is keeping the trees from getting in the death zone. Some of the trees, the bud hardiness of the most bud hardy trees are about 23 below zero. That's on a variety called PF24C. There's another variety called Siberian C that the tree itself is known to survive negative 35 degrees and still live. But I had that tree in my property outside for 6 years and never got a piece of fruit. It could be because of my very poor soil. I have a mix of silt and clay. It's like 80% silt and clay mix. And it's like the worst case scenario for what I want to do. The system proves that it can be done in any bad soil. So amending the soil the right way is everything the tree needed. Now, this is a thermostat, and it also helps me know the temperature. But what I initially did, 15 minutes, thank you. Initially, what I had the same heat tape in my tunnels as I did in my backyard. And the grant showed that that heat tape wasn't necessary. I thought it was doing more than it was, but it only bumped up the temperature like 3 degrees. But then it descended at the same rate as the tunnel I had with no heat tape in it. So, which was good news because I felt it was more sustainable. In other words, we don't need supplemental heat in the dead of winter. That is still yet, the jury is still out on that. There's years of research, but when I do need the heat, especially in the apricot tunnel, is in the spring when the flowers are open. And so there's 2 ways I try to monitor the bloom of the apricots. And what I do is I have a torpedo heater in there, which has got an electric ignition, but it's fueled by a kerosene. And I set the thermostat to 34 degrees, so the temperature, the heater will kick on at 34 degrees to keep the flower blooms alive. I've had years when that never happened during the bloom, no frost. Other years I had 10 frost days during the bloom. So less than 2 gallons of kerosene saved a whole crop of that year. And so I set that, the thermostat for that reason. Another way that I save the bloom is by leaving the white plastic on in the winter. And in apricots bloom in April, so the moment I would take the plastic off, the greenhouse effect would spike it up to 75 degrees if it was 40 degrees outside. Leaving the white-black plastic on keeps it about the same temperature inside as outside. So in the spring, that might be 40 degrees. And so doing that one year, the flower buds were all at white tip. Like I don't take the plastic off until the flower buds open, the flowers open, because at that point I want pollinators in there. But keeping the plastic on kept it from getting hot in there. And one year, the trees stayed at white tip for 7 days, which every day moved me out of the frost zone. Another thing is I'm constantly experimenting. One year I had no trees in one of my tunnels. The year I was going to plant, had the plastic on. I had potted apricots in there. And one morning it was 23 degrees when the flowers were open. That tunnel I didn't put a heater in, I just had the white plastic on. And the flowers inside that tunnel did not shrivel. They didn't burn. Have you ever noticed if you park your car underneath a tree in the fall when the first frost comes, you won't get frost on your windshield? But if you have your car in the driveway, you'll get frost. So it was the frost on the flowers that was killing the outside flowers. But the plastic did that, made that effect. There was no frost. It was the same as, some people spray strawberries with water to keep the frost from killing it. So I'm just discovering more organic ways to keep the flower buds alive, the flowers alive. There's a product Agro-K uses called, KPN or something. KLD, it's called KLD. It's a mixture of lactose, dextrose, and potassium. And it lowers the freezing temperature of the flower buds. And my friend Bob has done this, and his outside plants have survived a 23-degree frost and not died. What else do we got? Okay, there's the heater I use in the spring, kerosene heater. This shows the greatest difference in December of 2016, when the inside temperature of the high tunnel and one of the tunnels was 10 degrees above, and the outside temperature was 16 below. So there's a 26-degree difference. So again, another reason why the trees aren't losing their reserves is preventing extreme temperatures in there. I've noticed this is the year we had 95 inches of snow. So the snow was all the way up to the ridges of the high tunnel. So there was a lot of insulation happening there. But the year that I had a 36-degree below outside temperature and a 13 below inside temperature, only 2 inches of snow outside. So there's something happening there that I don't understand. That white plastic sealing all the cracks, preventing wind from blowing through is saving the trees. So that's exclusion netting, exclusion from bugs and from birds. Birds want to put their nests in there. I have opened up the end walls sometimes when the bees are really active. But the good thing about peaches and nectarines and apricots is that they're self-fruitful. So on years when there was 10 days of wet, moist weather while the flowers are open, I would go in there twice a day and shake the trees because the pollen would settle on each flower. And last year, in the apricots, one of the varieties of apricots bloomed 2 weeks earlier than anything else. And they were in complete darkness, no pollinators. I went out there and shook those things and they fruited, like abundant fruitfulness. So if something happens to the bees, we will all have to switch to peaches instead of apples. So summer pruning at least twice. This is looking down one of the aisles, and with the abundant growth, I just take the hedge clippers, go down there, and until they look like that. I'm keeping all the trees at about 7 feet. For several reasons. I don't want to get up on a ladder anymore. Number one. Number two, I want light penetration equally on the trees, all sides of the trees. For spraying and for any other kind of maintenance, it's nice to have a 7-foot thing. So I can pick fruit at this height. And so a friend of mine was going to try single spindle peach trees in the tunnel, but he was going to try to grow them up to the rafters, which are 14 feet. I advised him against that. He didn't want to change. I said, you know what, let's find out if it works. So that's going to be his method. But I've tried to keep the open vase method going. These are, the earliest peach I have is July 12th. The latest peach that I harvest is the end of September. Peaches have a unique numbering system. Red Haven is the middle of the season, so they call it 0. And any peach that ripens 5 days earlier or 5 days later is assigned a negative or a positive number. Blushing Star might be -5 and Galaxy might be +5. So based on that data, I ordered trees. I have 60 trees, different varieties. I've ordered trees from -30 to +42. So I have a 70-day window of time that the trees could ripen. And being under plastic distorts that. I found out that the heat units in the tunnels can reduce the time of ripening. Matt Mosier from Grandpa's Orchard told me that he has one tree in his glass house. It ripens 15 to 30 days before the ones outside of the same variety. So heat units will shrink the time that I can fit a later ripening peach into my window of harvest, which in Minnesota, when it gets up in October, it's so cold, it's hard to get the peaches to ripen. I have one variety that ripened on the 18th of October, and they were okay, but not really sweet. So that part of my research is to make this research available to people so that if anybody here decided to grow peaches, you would grow maybe 2 varieties in every tunnel. And then the pruning, the spraying, the watering, and everything would have to be timed with the process at which each tree was at. Right now it's a big mix. I got 60 varieties. I have to irrigate all at the same time. If you irrigate too much when the window of harvest comes, the peaches will split. So if I was to monitor that in Big 5D is that variety, I would stop 2 weeks before harvest so that they don't split. Those are apricots, and I use Surround. Haro Gem is the most productive. One of the varieties called Robata was so unproductive, I cut them down at 2 feet and regrafted stuff on and to experiment with different varieties. Those trees, I have 4 Haro Gems. They produce 213 pounds of apricots on 4 trees that are no higher than 7 feet, 7 by 5 by 7. But they basically aren't as much a moneymaker. They're more a novelty. 2 different kinds of apricots. There, I have a red flesh variety, a white flesh, that's a Saturn peach. I have several yellow varieties. I have some pie varieties, and I have mostly fresh eating. It's hard to get a good pie variety because both with apricots and peaches, they're so sweet in the high tunnel. The Brix is actually much higher. Like Contender is rated at about 12 Brix, which is the sugar content, soluble sugar content, and I've got them up to 17, which means Reliance, which is kind of a not so great tasting good peach for pies, and Big 24C is also a pie. They're so sweet, I hate to sell them as a pie peach. So we're still working on that. I, by the way, probably would not grow that because one of the problems with the Saturn, at least the second year they fruited, is when I pull them off the tree, they break, the stem pulls the skin off. So I could sell them immediately. They're delicious, but I can't keep them in my cooler for a couple days and resell them. So still figuring that out. This is a nectarine called Lola. It's a Siberian nectarine. And one customer likes them so much, he bought the whole tree, bought everything on the tree. So nectarines are smooth and more susceptible to plum curculio, which is the nemesis of stone fruits. And that's why I use Surround on the apricots. I wanted to see with the exclusion netting if I could get away without spraying. So that's still a work in progress. This variety is Tango's. It's a flat peach, a donut peach. In the catalog, they said it was one of the best tasting peaches, but, quote, hard to grow. I said, what do you mean by hard to grow? They said, well, some guy just complained, blah, blah, blah. I said, send me a tree. I can tell you that's the worst tasting peach I've ever had. And they were rubbery, maybe it's just in my system, but they were rubbery. They had almost no flavor. They produced abundantly. And oddly, because a woman came into the tunnel and she was looking at it, she says, I'll buy every peach on the tree. And I said, they don't taste very good. I was honest with her. She said, I don't care. And so she bought whatever I had. So this is the one in late September at the end of the year. China Pearl is a white-fleshed peach. And I have had many people say that's the best tasting peach they've ever had. Part of the reason is you're not buying them from Walmart. They're really fresh right off the tree. I wait until they're just like hand you a delicious peach. I've still, now this last year I had, White Lady is also one of the better tasting ones that are a mid-season peach. They're white-fleshed. A friend of mine, Thaddeus McCammon, if any of you guys know him, he grows peaches out in Montana, and he said this is the one he gives away for gifts to his friends. China Pearl is at end of the season, ripens at the end of September. Very abundant and beautiful. You can see how pristine they are. This is grade A fancy, delicious high bricks of food. And looks like we're back to water management. There is the temperature at 36 below was an analog thermometer. I was on my knees out there at the end of January in 2019 before I got my fancy monitors. That's what 5 pounds of peaches look like. This year I had a lower harvest, which meant I had several record-breaking peaches, 1.2 pound, 1 pound, 2 ounces, 4.5 inches across. I had several peaches that size. So there we go.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Time for 2 questions.
Before we use kerosene heaters to heat with, I've worked around in the shops, so you've got a lot of carbon dioxide stuff and even I call oil vapors.
Right.
How did that?
I wondered about that. I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. He's wondering about the kerosene heaters and if there was an oil vapor in there and the carbon monoxide. I'm careful before I go in there once I have the heater on. For one thing, they're not running the whole time. And I open the doors on the north side immediately when I go in there. One other concern I had was it going to kill the insects that were pollinating? And I could see no evidence of that. So most of the time, it's just spurts of heat that are heating up at 34, and then it goes off for a half an hour, and then it kicks back on. So right now, it seemed to work. I thought about propane. I just happen to have a kerosene heater. Yeah.
Dan, for the vegetable growers who may have tunnels that kind of are set up like yours and may want to dip their toes into this, but don't want to take the whole tunnel out of production for 2 years, is there a system, you showed us how unique this is there a system where you could kind of hybrid do some like summer annual production alongside some peaches?
The question was, could we do a few peach trees in a vegetable production high tunnel? I think that would be pretty hard to do. I would suggest a separate tunnel. I tell people who, when I do this, and speak to the group at the Arboretum or people who are doing backyard production, you could just almost buy one of those card tents from Menards and put 2 or 3 peach trees in there. It has to be airtight and light tight and rabbit proof. And it helps to monitor the temperature so you can see. The same principles I did here, you could do on a small scale.
Where do you find your recommendations as in for what to give to the trees as far as fertilizer?
So the question is, how do I find what kind of the recommendations for what kind of fertilizer I put on the tree? When I take a soil sample or a leaf sample, I send it to Midwest Labs in Nebraska, and they work with AgroK, the company that I buy product from. It's organic products. And they will send me an email with the recommended spray on it. And so that's how, and I don't do this every year, but I do it after the fruit is done. Harvesting is when I do my leaf sample. And I've only done soil samples when I initially fertilize the ground that I rototill the nutrients into. So that's pretty much it. I don't want to toxify. I've toxified trees before by spraying too much product on there. So I send the leaf sample and I go, Dan, you really blew it on the potassium. So they could tell when I'm making mistakes. Yeah.
Dan, could you share, where did you get plant material, rootstocks?
Okay, so rootstocks I get from various places. I have grafted more trees I planted than purchased them from a nursery. I purchased from Adams County Nursery on the East Coast and from Cummins Nursery. I've also purchased from Schlaubox, which is an Amish group. And what I'm trying to do is match a rootstock. One of the grants, the second one I got for the Minnesota Sustainable, I did 4 different rootstocks to see which was the most productive, which works best in my soil, which are the most winter hardy. Unfortunately, the voles destroyed all the rootstock. So, but St. Julian A has been consistently the best producing stone fruit one that I have. It's compatible with apricots, peaches, nectarines, and plums, both hybrid and European plums. Just so you know, the outside plants I have that aren't in tunnels, I have probably 20 varieties of plums, including European varieties and hybrid varieties. I have pears, I have apples, I grow heart nuts, I have a half plot of experimental apricots and plums as well. So you're invited to come up and visit, and you can camp at my place if you want. I'll make food for you or a pie or something, and I love visitors.
Sounds like a great offer. Give a round of applause.